Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty fundamental, I think. Understanding the foundations of how organizations really govern and manage their information and technology effectively.
That's right. And we're using a key resource for this, the COBIT 2019 Framework, Introduction and Methodology, PDF. We're really going to focus in on those crucial first 3 chapters. They set the whole stage.
Yeah, think of this as maybe the first couple of classes in a course. We want to orient you, guide you through the core ideas right from the start.
Yeah.
Why is this stuff so important now? Who's it actually for? And what are the basic principles that make it all tick?
Exactly. We're going to try and unpack it together. So let's dive right in with what the framework says first, which is really the why. Why is this enterprise governance of information and technology, or EGDI, why is it so critical today?
Well, Chapter 1 kicks off making a really strong point about the role of INT, information and technology. It's way past being just a support function now. With digital transformation being everywhere, INT is absolutely vital for enterprise survival, for sustainability, and definitely for growth.
And what really jumps out is the shift in who's responsible. The framework is quite clear. Governing boards, senior management, they just can't delegate INT decisions anymore, or ignore them, or avoid them.
Why not?
Because fundamentally, stakeholder value what the business delivers is increasingly driven by digital stuff. So if you're not governing INT well, you're basically putting the core value of the business at risk.
Okay, so that's where EG Enterprise Governance of Information and Technology, that's where it fits in. The framework sees it as an integral part of overall corporate governance, not some separate IT thing.
Right. It's exercised by the board, typically, overseeing how processes, structures, and what the source calls relational mechanisms are defined and put into practice. These mechanisms are really about how people and different parts of the business interact regarding INT.
And the goal here, it seems to be about enabling both business folks and IT folks to do their jobs properly, making sure business and IT are actually pulling in the same direction.
And critically, getting real, tangible business value out of all those investments in INT-enabled projects or systems.
Now, the framework doesn't sugarcoat it. It says EGIT is complex. It's multifaceted. There's no magic wand, no silver bullet solution.
Exactly, which means you have to tailor the governance approach to your specific company, your context. And this, well, it means boards and senior managers need to really step up, accept more direct accountability, and frankly, drive a different way of thinking, a different culture around INT throughout the whole organization.
Okay, so that covers the why and the what of EGK. But what about the results? What happens when you actually get this right? The framework points to 3 main expected outcomes.
Yeah, 3 big ones. First is benefits realization. This isn't just hoping for the best with INT projects. It's about actively creating value.
How so?
It means ensuring you get solutions that are actually fit for purpose, delivered on time, within budget, and making sure they generate the financial and non-financial benefits you intended. Plus, identifying and ditching initiatives that just aren't adding much value. It's about linking INT value directly to business value, and importantly, measuring that.
Okay, benefits realization, what's second?
Second is risk optimization. So if benefits are about creating value, risk is more about preserving value. This is about tackling the business risks that come with using INT, owning it, operating it, integrating it.
And how does the framework define that risk?
It calls INT-related business risk basically any event involving INT that could potentially harm the business. The key idea here is that INT risk isn't separate. It has to be plugged into the overall enterprise risk management strategy.
Right, makes sense. You can't manage it in a silo.
Exactly. And just like benefits, you need to measure how well you're doing at optimizing INT risk in terms of preserving business value.
Okay, benefits risk. What's the third leg of the stool?
The third is resource optimization. This is making sure you have the right capabilities, enough resources, and effective ones. That means people, infrastructure, applications, data.
So the building blocks.
Pretty much. Providing an integrated, cost-effective IT infrastructure, keeping technology up to date where needed, and a really big focus on people training, keeping good people, making sure they have the right skills, and of course using data and information effectively is part of this too.
So it's this triangle.
Yeah.
Creating value, preserving value, and having the right foundation to do both efficiently.
You got it. And underpinning all 3 is the need for strategic alignment and constantly measuring performance. The source even mentions research showing that companies doing poorly with EG also do poorly on business IT alignment and getting value from digital efforts.
So it really drives home that governance is much bigger than just the basics of GRC governance, risk, and compliance.
Yeah.
That's often too narrow a view, it seems.
Definitely. The framework implies GRC is part of it, but EG is broader, more strategic.
Okay, so if this is the goal, how do organizations actually go about building such a system? This sounds like a big undertaking.
It can be, and that's precisely where a framework like COBIT enters the picture.
Right, so COBIT is presented as this best practice framework that's been developed over, 25 years?
Yeah, long history. And COBIT 2019 is the latest evolution, building on that past, bringing in new ideas and trying to make them practical, operational.
It apparently started more in the IT audit space.
That's its origin, yeah. But it's grown significantly into a much broader framework covering the whole governance and management of enterprise I&T. It aims to be that kind of generally accepted standard.
Okay, this is probably a good point to clarify something the framework itself spends time on. What exactly is COBIT? And maybe just as crucial, what is it not? Because there seem to be some misconceptions out there.
Very important distinction. So what it is, first, it's a framework for governing and managing enterprise I&T. Note the word enterprise. It's aimed at the whole business, not just the IT department working alone.
That's a key scope point.
Definitely. And second, it makes a very clear split between governance and management. We touched on this, but it's fundamental to COBIT.
Refresh us on that split again.
Sure. Governance is about evaluating stakeholder needs, setting the direction for I&T, and then monitoring performance and compliance against that direction. Think board-level, senior leadership responsibility.
Okay, setting the course and checking progress.
Right. Whereas management is the execution part. Planning, building, running, and monitoring all the I&T activities in line with the direction set by governance. This is typically led by executive management, the CEO, and their team.
Got it. Governance directs, management executes.
Precisely. COBIT also defines the components you need for a governance system, things like processes, org structures, policies, information flows, the culture and behaviors, skills, infrastructure, the whole package.
And it helps you tailor it, right? You mentioned that earlier.
Yes, it provides what it calls design factors to help customize the governance system because, like we said, every organization is different.
And it groups things into objectives.
Yeah, it groups components into governance and management objectives to tackle specific issues, and you manage these objectives to achieve certain capability levels.
Okay, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Now, the flip side, what is COBIT not? This seems important for setting expectations.
Crucial. First, it's not a complete technical blueprint of your entire IT environment. It won't replace your network diagrams or detailed server inventories.
Okay, it's not the technical nitty-gritty.
Second, it's not a framework for organizing your business processes, like manufacturing or sales. It focuses specifically on the governance and management of the I&T that supports those business processes.
Right. Scope is I&T governance, not general business process management.
Third, it's not a technical framework for managing every specific piece of technology. It won't tell you the best way to configure a specific database or manage a particular cloud service at that granular level.
So it stays at a higher governance and management level.
Exactly. And maybe the most important is not. COBIT doesn't make your IT decisions for you. It won't tell you what your IT strategy should be or which specific architecture is best or exactly how much money to spend.
Ah, so it doesn't prescribe the content of the decisions.
Correct. Instead, it defines which decisions need to be made, how they should be approached, and who should be responsible for making them. It provides the structure for effective decision-making, not the answers themselves.
That's a really vital distinction. Understanding that helps you use the framework correctly. Okay, so that gives us a good handle on Chapter 1, the why, the what, the expected outcomes, and what COBIT actually is and isn't. Logically, the document then asks, well, who should be using this?
Right. Chapter 2 dives straight into the intended audience. And COBIT is pretty clear. The target audience is broad, encompassing stakeholders involved in both EGI and, more broadly, corporate governance.
It breaks them down into internal and external stakeholders, doesn't it?
It does. Internally, you've got boards. COBIT helps them understand how to get value from I&T and what their oversight role involves. Executive management gets guidance on organizing I&T and monitoring its performance.
What about managers closer to the ground?
Business managers can use it to figure out how to get the I&T solutions they need and leverage new tech. IT managers get guidance on structuring their function, managing performance, operations, costs, and aligning with the business strategy.
And assurance. Risk.
Yep. Assurance providers, like auditors, find it useful for managing dependencies on external providers and getting assurance over IP controls. And risk management professionals can use it to help ensure all the relevant IT-related risks are identified and managed properly within the bigger enterprise risk picture.
Okay, that's the internal view. What about external stakeholders?
Externally, it mentions regulators. They might look to COBIT as evidence that an organization has a proper governance system in place for compliance. And even business partners and IP vendors are considered stakeholders, as the framework helps ensure the enterprise operates securely, reliably, and compliantly in its interactions with them.
So a really wide range of people have a potential interest here.
They do, but the framework adds a little caution. It notes that to really use COBIT effectively, especially the tailoring part, people need a certain level of experience and a good understanding of their own organization's specific context. It's not quite a beginner's guide or a paint-by-numbers kit.
Makes sense. You need to know your own reality to apply the guidance.
And it also points out the audience isn't just involved at one point in time. It covers the whole life cycle, designing the governance system, running it day to day, and providing assurance that it's working as intended.
All right. So we know why EJIT matters, what COBIT is trying to be, and who it's aimed at. Chapter 3 then gets to the real foundations, right? The core principles.
Exactly. Chapter 3 lays out the fundamental principles that COBIT 2019 is built on. And interestingly, it splits them into two sets.
Two sets. How so?
Well, there are 6 principles for what an effective governance system itself should look like, the core requirements for any good EJIT system within an enterprise. And then there are 3 principles for the governance framework, like COBIT, that you use to help build that system. Kind of like principles for the house and principles for the blueprint.
Okay, let's start with the house itself. The 6 principles for a governance system. What's number 1?
Number 1, and arguably the most important, provides stakeholder value. Everything the governance system does should ultimately be about satisfying stakeholder needs and generating value from I&T. This means balancing benefits, risk, and resources, and it needs an actionable strategy to make it happen.
Okay, value first. What's next?
Second, holistic approach. A good system isn't just a collection of random parts. It's built from many different components, processes, culture, structures, information, technology, skills that all need to work together seamlessly like a well-oiled machine.
Got it. Integrated. Third,
dynamic governance system. The business world changes, technology changes, strategies change. The governance system can't be set in stone. It has to be adaptable, able to evolve based on changes in those design factors we mentioned to stay relevant and useful over time. Future-proof, ideally.
so it needs to be flexible. Number 4.
Fourth, governance, distinct from management. We keep coming back to this, but it's a core principle for the system itself. You need that clear separation of duties, responsibilities, and structures between the governing body and the management executing the activities.
Keeps accountability clear. Okay, 5th.
Fifth, tailored to enterprise needs. Again, reinforcing that customization is essential. The governance system has to be designed and fine-tuned using those design factors to fit the specific context, goals, and risk profile of that particular enterprise. No generic solutions.
Right. And the last one, number 6.
Sixth, end-to-end governance system. This means governance shouldn't just focus on the central IT department. It needs to cover all the information and technology the enterprise uses, wherever it resides, whether that's in business units, shadow IT, or even externally sourced services. It's about the whole picture.
Okay, those 6 principles define a good governance system. Now, what about the principles for the framework itself, the blueprint, like COBIT? You said there were 3.
Yes, 3 principles for a governance framework. First, based on a conceptual model. A good framework should have a clear, logical structure. It needs to identify the key components and how they relate to each other. This provides consistency and even makes automation easier down the line.
So it needs a solid architecture.
Second, open and flexible. The framework shouldn't be a closed box. It needs to be designed so you can add new content, maybe for new technologies or specific focus areas like cybersecurity or cloud, and address emerging issues without breaking the whole model. It needs to adapt while keeping its integrity.
Allows it to evolve.
Yeah.
And the third framework principle.
Third, align to major standards. A practical framework can't exist in isolation. It needs to align with and ideally leverage other major relevant standards, frameworks, and regulations that organizations are likely already using, things related to risk, security, service management, project management, and so on.
Makes it easier to integrate into the existing landscape.
Exactly. It avoids duplication and helps create a more cohesive overall governance environment.
So those are the principles for the system and the framework. How does the document say COBIT 2019 itself stacks up against these?
Well, it briefly touches on how COBIT 2019 aimed to improve on previous versions by better embodying these principles. It mentions things like being more flexible and open, especially through using those design factors and the idea of focus areas for specific topics.
Okay.
It also highlights its effort to be current and relevant by aligning with the latest versions of major standards and regulations. It suggests the conceptual model makes its application more prescriptive, guiding users on how to tailor it effectively. And it points to an improved integrated performance management model, which includes capability and maturity concepts aligned with things like CMMI.
Gotcha. And it also had that note about terminology, right?
Oh yeah, just a practical point for anyone reading the source document. It explicitly states that terms like governance of enterprise information and technology, EGIT, governance of IT, and IT governance are often used interchangeably throughout. So don't get too hung up if the phrasing shifts slightly. The underlying concept is generally the same within the context of COBIT.
Right. Good practical tip.
Yeah.
Okay, so wrapping up this initial section then, we've covered quite a bit of ground here from these first 3 chapters.
We have. We've looked at the why EGIT is so critical now. We've defined what EGIT and COBIT are, and importantly, what they aren't. We've identified the wide range of stakeholders involved.
And we've unpacked those core principles. The 6 for a good governance system itself, and the 3 for a useful framework like COBIT that helps you build it.
Understanding these foundational pieces really is essential, I think. They provide the context, the why and how, for everything else that comes later in the COBIT framework. It helps you, the listener, see the bigger picture, why just letting INT happen isn't enough anymore, and why a structured approach is needed to get value and manage risk effectively.
Exactly. It moves the conversation from perhaps confusion or ad hoc approaches towards a more directed effort focused on value and risk. And thinking about those principles again, especially number 3 for the system dynamic governance system, and number 5, tailored to enterprise needs.
Yeah, those two really emphasize that this isn't static or one-size-fits-all.
Right. Which leads to a final thought, perhaps. Given that your governance system must be dynamic and must be tailored, what specific things about your organization's context, maybe it's your industry's regulatory pressures, your company culture, how fast technology changes for you, or your key strategic goals right now, what do you think would have the biggest impact on how you'd actually apply these core EGM principles in your reality?
That's the real challenge, isn't it? Taking the framework and making it work specifically for you. Definitely something worth pondering as you think about improving INT governance where you work.